Hello, hello! Okay, you guys apparently are okay with me talking about Darktide a little bit more, so let's go. In my prior video, I talked about how Darktide had gotten a little bit better since the game's systems had been revamped. So I thought I'd go over why, the general idea behind a cosmetic system, how you improve it, and what makes a good cosmetic system in the first place. Okay. Perhaps the most famous microtransaction cosmetic ever made was the Oblivion horse armor in the Elder Scrolls Oblivion. There was outrage whenever it was revealed because it was still the era of DLC. Now, I have to explain this a little bit. In the 1990s, making a game was often done by teams of, like one guy to 20 people in many cases, especially in the early 90s. Now, getting a game out of the door at all was extremely difficult, and distribution wasn't easy at all. It was the era of shareware and demos and CDs containing 500 games. They weren't really games, it was like mostly demos and crap. But you get the idea. When you had more ideas for your little game, you released a sequel typically, because DLC obviously wasn't much of a thing until you could actually download the thing, and the internet was not an installation in people's lives yet in the 1990s. You would instead get games that flip their own assets and engine most of the times. Yeah, things like, from Ocarina of Time you would get Majora's Mask in a sense, or you get something like the entire Dawn of War series, which peaks at Dark Crusade, but is acceptable once Soulstorm fixes damn memory leak issues. Anyways, that horse armor was a big deal at the time because, of course, people were outraged at it simply existing because they knew what was going to happen. It reflected the start of the new age of microtransactions as opposed to DLC releases. It was around this point when devs were contemplating the idea of, how do I make money, that they realized, oh, I could do this. Loot boxes, etc. They realized that they could not bother with new games, new DLC, and focus entirely on platforming small, overpriced purchases instead of anything else. An unfortunate reality of DLCs is that they don't sell anywhere near as well as the base game typically, and they tend to have lower retention. At the same time, video game sequels are often, home run hits or they're just total whiffs. It is pretty typical for consumers to like trilogies, but not really be on board with a series if it goes past that. Yeah, typical issues. So by the time that we hit battle passes in Fortnite, people had gotten very accustomed to being robbed and playing the same thing for 5,000 hours instead of 50, and the new content that the game brings being glitter instead of actual new experiences. Now I'm going to tell you something that you don't want to hear. Things are worth what you'll pay for it, and people bought it, so that's what it's worth. This system is easier and more profitable for developers, so there is no going back. Prices only go down when people stop buying things at their current price, and things only change when they have to. So, with our YouTube economics intro aside, what's up with Darktide's cosmetic system, for example? Darktide has 3 different brands of cosmetics. Paid-only microtransactions in the form of Commodore's Vestures, the Penance and Hestia reward system, and the in-game mission currency reward system. Now, that mission reward cosmetic system, the shop, is basically about 4 or 5 models that are just recolored. You can buy them with mission reward money that you get from actually doing the missions. They're instantly accessible, and that's it. It's very mundane. The models look mostly the same, and some are just completely indistinguishable from one another. In addition to having gray, blue, red, sometimes green, variations, sometimes they have different patterns on the cloth, but that's pretty much it. You can't change anything about the models, and the chosen colors or the patterns may not correspond to the model that you would prefer. So if one of them has like a little candle on the shoulder and you don't want it there, you can't get rid of it. It's just on there. Now that aside, the looks of all the models are so similar to one another to some degree that it sort of has a default look to it, in a sense. This is probably to encourage you to go get something else. Now, the penance rewards are a little bit more varied. Some of the rewards are basically just slightly recolored mission reward cosmetics, the ones that I just talked about, whereas other ones are entirely new models. Now, the penance system is much better than it used to be. It used to be terrible. Without going into the weeds about that, penances range wildly from adds up over time, just keep working at it buddy, you'll get it, to use this specific build with people over Discord with specific builds themselves, or you will never ever complete it. I don't like those ones. I don't like them. I have spent weeks trying to get specific penances for like a shirt, and I've made 0 progress doing it. But yeah, it's different, and they look different. The microtransaction store, I covered some in the last video, and is the main reason to make this video. The store sucks. Far and away, most of the comments that I received in my video were talking about, wow, the game is so much better than it used to be. The cosmetic store is still awful. And yes, it is. And that's why we're making the video. But let's go over why. Now, some of its main issues include things like the cosmetics being poor quality. There are no animations on things that look like they should absolutely be animated. There are sometimes missing details, like, for example, Krieg mask hoses just not existing, and stuff like that. The shop also includes minor recolors. So I used my default colors that I got from pre-purchasing the game to buy a jacket for my veteran that received a recolor of that same exact model the very next week. And thankfully for me, I didn't really care too much for the new recolor, so not a huge loss. But if it was, boy, I would have been very, very pissy. Just a big old baby about it. The shop itself has a 3-page rotation per class that adds a new page every 2 weeks, and then also removes the oldest page, with no way to see what will return, or what has been missed, or what the schedule is, or anything, so you just don't know. It's sort of like the Warframe Vault system, but way more intense, because it's not for a prime variant of something, it's just for anything. And, most of all, everything is overpriced. Not as much as, say, like an Overwatch skin, which is absurdly overpriced, but it's still overpriced. Prices are also set so that you will always need to buy more than what you need to convert to their fictional currency in order to get an outfit. This will, of course, leave you with just enough money to tempt you into buying more stuff. So yes, sleazy, but also incredibly typical. You see this all the time. There's no law against it, so this is the way it's going to be. It is measured in USD, so 2 Aquila is about $1. A hat can cost you $7 in some cases. If one entire outfit costs, say, $3,700, then you're out almost $20. And $20 used to get you an entire new expansion pack of a major game. Now it gets you an outfit you'll never see because you're playing in first person. I could rant about prices, but you get the idea. Instead, let's look at what can or can't be done about each of these issues. Color and texture choice, model quality, shop rotation, and pricing. First, I don't have that much of an issue with the mission reward store being so limited. It could probably be folded into the penance system, I guess, as one menu, but that's not necessary. There are lots of small granular ways that you can improve the store, but I'm just not going to go into it. Items having different colors, different variations, is not the core issue. Sure, we would like to be able to use, say, an RGB wheel to recolor things as we see fit, but that is a very typical issue with a lot of games. Now, not every single game engine supports that kind of interface, and making the interface itself to support it may take time, and you may not want the color palette of your game to become a nightmare, so you focus on swatches instead. If you had a typical color wheel in Darktide, then you might have people running around in bright neon green and purple and just atrocities. You're fighting the abominations, you don't want to make them. More of the actual issue is that some models don't have certain colors or certain patterns or certain details, even though another very, very similar model actually does, and it's not clear why. Again, having a customization feature may be a complex issue, I don't know for this particular engine and game. I'm an artist, so I know how hard recoloring things can be, but also I know how insanely easy it actually can be. I don't have enough internal knowledge about what's going on at Fatshark, but I feel like this is something that probably should not be a problem and could very easily be remedied in various ways. They just don't want to do it. I can sort of understand the mentality that you want your cosmetics to be somewhat unique. Maybe you don't want millions of variations inside of your store, which is why you have a customization feature. And maybe you don't want it to seem diluted by having brown suit with candle on side, brown suit with candle on side, but candle on side on the other shoulder as well, and so on and so forth. So again, the actual store itself is fine, it's more of a customization issue. Now, the model quality itself, especially the cosmetic store items. This again is a more granular issue. It is often linked to time constraints and resources. I have often, very often with many games, experienced this problem of the game is garbage, but wow, the art team is really doing their job. This happens so consistently. We, the artists, do our jobs. What's going on at Fat Shark, I have no idea, but the artists are likely doing their best in the circumstances that they find themselves in. Although there are instances of models having things like holes in the model geometry, or similar things to that should not be happening. Now, I'm not around the Reddit subculture enough to know things like this, but some people accuse Fat Shark of internally taking lots of vacations and not doing enough work and so on. How much of that is true? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what Fat Shark's internal culture is like. So I'll only say that the model quality should be higher for the price. Or the quality is exactly what it should be for a better price. As an artist, I know you can always spend more time to make things look better, or, different at least. So you can't always control that, but you can control the price. Now, the shop rotation. The shop rotation is an obvious issue since people want to know what their options are. They may even end up buying more things if they see the things that they actually want. Darktide is the kind of game that you might play for 1 or 2 months, drop, and then come back to later. So the fact that you're not seeing all the options at the same time means that the time period in which you're most inclined to buy a bunch of things, you don't get to buy them. I feel like this FOMO system is based off of old marketing strategies from the early 2000s that didn't actually work and have been dropped by most studios. Seeing FOMO at all is a massive turnoff to most people that just chases them off of the store in the first place. For whales, economic whales that keep your game afloat, they'll keep track of it anyways, so it doesn't even affect them. The only reason I can think of beyond just laziness not improving it, or internal meddling, I guess, is that someone in the upper ranks is afraid that a whale will realize how much money that they've wasted if they see all of it in one place. I've seen some people say Darktide broke them of their collector mentality because they were bleeding their bank accounts dry trying to keep up. It is a good thing for the players that not many outfits in the store create this, oh man, I've gotta have that feeling, because the shop is terrible. While a lot of people brought it up in my comment section, in general, you don't really see people talk about the cosmetic store that much because it feels like people just gave up at some point, and they just accept this is what it is awful, we typically don't use it except for Billy over there, and you look over at Billy and it's just covered in like gold and shit. So that's the state that it's in. They must be making enough money to keep things as they are though. So someone somewhere, Billy I guess in this case, is endorsing it. And that is why there is no microtransaction recession, so to speak. It doesn't matter if most people won't use their store, it only matters if 1 or 2 people use it excessively. And it could be that actually lots of people use it. I don't know. There's no way that we can track that data. Only they can. And apparently something is going right. So regardless of whether we like it or not, it seems to be doing pretty well for them. And like I said earlier, things are worth what you will pay for it. And are you paying for it? Apparently the answer is yes. So lastly, let's talk about pricing. Like I said, if people would pay $1,000 for a hat, you would see $1,000 hats. If people paid me $1 billion to make one video, I would make one video. Then I would probably make more because I like making them, but not as many as I make now. And I think that's Fat Shark's general issue, their internal culture issue. They don't have to make certain things better, and that includes how they make money. Now, as I pointed out in my prior video that was actually about this, they did 180 on their terrible progression system, and I think they did that because they probably knew that everyone would bounce off a PS5 release, which they just did, unless they stopped being stubborn mules about how the progression system works, because they realized that's the thing that people were bouncing off the game with the most. And I'm sure that there's also a mentality of you don't mess with the golden goose. If something is actually making you money, you don't change that thing. So the unfortunate reality is that the prices are going to stay the same until people stop paying for them. So you will see the cosmetic shop eventually improve once they've cut too many costs, but they still need more overhead for a dwindling player population. That's the only time that you're ever going to see those prices drop. So is that the end of the discussion? No. There is something that you can do. One of the problems that they have with the system is that there is no player engagement with the system. I would say one of the most obvious solutions is to let people earn their own Aquillas. And by the way, I might be mispronouncing that, like Aquillas? I don't know. I just pause and look at a YouTube video. Apparently it's Aquila. It's very good, very fancy. Now, internally, obviously, you would not want to do this, because why would you want people to circumvent paying, especially if you can do something like earn them by doing missions, when you have certain players who are your primary base for actually earning, that are just doing missions all the time. I know players don't think about this sort of thing in this context, but I do, and I know developers certainly do. Players just want free shit, and developers just want them to actually pay money because, they're feeding their families. But my goal here is to get players to invest in the system and seeing that as another game system that they want to advance. If they see the microtransaction store as being a big collection of things that they want to collect all of, they would be far more willing to engage with actually investing their real money into it, as opposed to seeing it as a gun that's pointed at them. So I'm sure that a lot of players hearing this be like, oh yeah, it'd be great if I could complete a mission and earn 1,000 Aquilas. But no, that's not what I'm saying, because one player might play the game once a month, whereas another player might be playing it non-stop the entire day and running missions, like 20-minute missions, just constantly. But the funny thing is, they already have a system for this, and it's called contracts. The contracts are just like random things that you do during the course of a mission, and then whenever you complete them, then you get this resource that's used for buying what I consider to be worthless garbage most of the time, because while they are at 500 power, their stats are all terrible, so I just kind of ignore the store entirely. But if you did something like, say, every week, you had the ability for players to complete the contracts on that character, and then make, say, 5 Aquilas, something that's not really that big of a deal, that's just supplementary, and not like a main goal, but it's just something that you do as a bonus, then that will get people more involved in actually contributing into that system. It keeps them playing more, and if they play more, then they might want more things. And even if you don't like that idea, you can see what I'm saying. That there are lots of economic avenues that Fat Shark could be exploiting or exploring that they aren't because they're simply terrified and stubborn. Something Star Trek Online used to do, I mean they still do it, but there's not much reason to do it these days since the game is so old, but you can. They had this lifetime payment plan where you pay them like $500 one time, and then from that point forward, for the rest of time presumably, until the game shuts down, your account will have like 500 of their premium currency added to your account every single month, which is not that much, but it is there consistently. So over a very long period of time, you can just keep making more of it, which is not that big of a deal for various other economic reasons related to Star Trek Online I'm not going to get into. But point being, because they're seeing that premium currency go up over time, then they don't feel quite as bad about the idea of staying invested in that system. That sort of lifetime veteranship also attracts people that have disposable income, that want to contribute money, that themselves will then be more susceptible to paying more money as they see that number go down, because they want to see number go up. But again, this all hinges on whether or not they see that lots of people are already engaging with their monetary system. I'm not, but lots of people could be. I don't know. The lights are still on, so presumably they're doing fine, but I'm saying you could be doing better. The goal of this video was to illustrate why these issues exist, not necessarily to describe how to fix them. Things aren't changing for reasons, so otherwise, yes, add Aquilas, add the cosmetic store to show 100% of the items that you want to buy, lower your prices, let me recolor and repattern and re-detail my cosmetics with customization, and so on. These are obvious demands, with obvious impediments if you actually think about it. The difference is that some of those impediments are respectable and understandable, while others are not. Most of what makes a good microtransaction store, just for finally here, most of what makes a good microtransaction store is the appearance of goodwill, transparency, and willful engagement from your consumers. This is why most of the rest of the world now have laws that punish US companies for doing this sort of abuse, and why things like loot boxes are mostly dead now, thank goodness. It works. These things work, but it's predatory. It gestates bad will and has bad long-term effects. And angry populations of players that have good representation in their government, which we don't have, will actually do something about it. But I'm getting too zoomed out here. Again, point being, when this sort of thing comes up, people often point to things like Deep Rock Galactic for a reason. It's not because that's a perfect game, it's because players have faith in that game's developers. The culture around the studio, and the way that players perceive their treatment of them, is very good. And that's something Fat Shark isn't good at. And that is what the actual problem is. So the solutions to Fat Shark's store woes is, make me feel like I didn't make a mistake buying this. There are a lot of ways to do that. Try some. And try contributing to my Patreon. I'm not good at making money myself because I never mention it. I worry constantly about my content, but I don't advertise well. So I empathize a lot with this sort of problem. I hope you guys liked this video. Every time I stopped recording, we had great games, and whenever I started recording, they just went to poop. I kept wanting to get, like, footage of cool Ogren rock throws, but the Emperor hasn't been with me lately, I guess. You could also sub to my Twitch if you want, but it takes, like, 50% of the money. In the meantime, just enjoy more of my videos, comments, engagement, etc. You guys know the drill. Modern YouTube. I will see you next time.